Sheldon Whitehouse didn't just question Kash Patel. He opened a door that many in Washington hoped would stay shut, and what spilled out was a warning so sharp, so unsettling, that the room shifted before anyone even realized what was happening. It started with a simple observation, but within seconds, Whitehouse was mapping out a pattern that left even seasoned lawmakers staring in silence. Because this wasn't about political rivalry. It wasn't about scoring points. It was about what happens when someone with a trail of threats, online taunts, and questionable testimony is positioned to help lead one of the most powerful law enforcement institutions in the country.
Remember January 6th. Colleagues running through our halls to flee the mob, colleagues shouting that rioters should be shot, us returning to our constitutional business through hallways cleared for us by automatic weapons carrying SWAT teams. None of you, none of us, said those violent rioters should be pardoned. A Republican colleague said such pardons would be hard to believe, even absurd. Your former colleague J.D. Vance said the violent rioters should not be pardoned. Even Jim Jordan said pardons would, and I quote, focus on all the people who didn't commit any violence. Well, Trump pardoned all of them. And there's a lesson in that. Every time you think Trump would never go that far, rethink that. We all seem to agree that violence against police is unacceptable, yet more than 600 people who physically attacked Capitol Police officers were just put back on the street, part of a 1,500-person personal Trump army, now out there with people who have proven themselves willing to do violence on Trump's call. In only 10 days, some are already back committing crimes. We've also tried as a committee, together, to address the dangers of illicit drug sales over the internet, and I assume we're all against murder for hire. But Trump also just pardoned a dark web operator sentenced to life in prison for trafficking illegal drugs online and accused of soliciting murders for hire. Those pardons, as Mr. Patel has said, are a mistake, but they are also a signal that we are entering a strange and dangerous time. That is the context for today's hearing. Warnings that the FBI could become Trump's enforcer, use the powers of law enforcement to stifle speech and dissent, punish political rivals of either party, and hand out free passes, get out of jail free cards to violent supporters are warnings we should heed. Here are some warnings of this nominee's Trump administration colleagues. Former Attorney General Bill Barr said, this nominee has virtually no experience that would qualify him to serve at the highest level of the world's preeminent law enforcement agency, end quote, and we would never be able to command the respect necessary to run the day-to-day operations of the Bureau. That's for the deputy position. Former CIA Director Gina Haspel was reported threatening to resign rather than have this nominee serve under her. John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, said, I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him. Trump's deputy national security advisor, the nominee's former supervisor, said, his ideas are ludicrous. He's absolutely unqualified for this job. He's untrustworthy. And it's an absolute disgrace to even consider an individual of this nature. That's from Republican appointees who worked with him. And here's what this nominee himself has said about using his office to prosecute journalists. We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. We're gonna come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly. Is that a correct quotation, Mr. Patel?
Senator, that's a partial quotation.
But it's correct.
In part.
Regarding his publication of his enemies list, Mr. Patel proclaimed, the manhunt starts tomorrow, and reposted a video depicting him taking a chainsaw to his political enemies. Is that you, Kash Patel, reposting that at the top of that page?
Senator, I had nothing to do with the creation of that
Is
meme,
that you reposting it, was my question.
and that's me at the top.
You said FBI agents were responsible for the violence on January 6th, and I quote you here, beyond a reasonable doubt. Is that what you said?
That's completely incorrect, and I appreciate the opportunity to address that.
I'll give you an opportunity in writing, but this is my time now.
Have at it.
An Inspector Attorney General investigation found that that was false. And you said we should impeach judges who rule against Donald Trump, who are, in your words, political terrorists. When this nominee tries to explain all this away, keep one thing in mind. He's testified under oath before a Colorado judge who presided over a Trump case in which he was a witness. And the judge found, and I'm quoting here, he was not a credible witness. His testimony is not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. That's from a judge. This is a dangerous time, and I ask all my colleagues to consider whether these plain comments by this person and by his own Trump administration colleagues should be given a blind eye, just overlooked, or whether, like the warnings of pardoning violent January 6 offenders, they're warnings to be heeded. There is an unfathomable difference between a seeming facade being constructed around this nominee here today and what he has actually done and said in real life when left to his own devices. Conduct shows character. And if you look at history, you see the danger of security chiefs in authoritarian regimes becoming the tools of political power. The characteristics that they often show are that they are vengeful, that they are grandiose, that they are intemperate, that they are partisan and blindly loyal, and that they are servile and won't say no. I'm afraid that the history of this nominee's conduct.
And from the very first moment, Whitehouse made it clear this wasn't normal, and pretending it is could cost the country far more than anyone is ready to admit. He began by pulling the room back in time, not to relive the chaos, but to remind everyone of the stakes. Lawmakers scrambling through hallways, armed officers escorting them through smoke-filled corridors, and the raw fear that swept through Congress as violence erupted and overwhelmed the building. No one in that moment, Whitehouse reminded them, said the attackers deserved mercy. No one argued that those who assaulted officers should simply walk free. And yet, today, hundreds of the people who physically attacked law enforcement have been released back onto the streets. Some, according to reports circulating online, have already been tied to new incidents only days after being freed. It wasn't an accusation, it was a pattern, a signal, a shift in how power is being used and who it's being used to protect. That set the frame for the real question. How does someone like Kash Patel fit into this new environment? And the reason that question landed so heavily is because Patel's public record isn't subtle. It isn't the kind of resume built on quiet professionalism or calm judgment. Instead, it's stacked with threats toward journalists, warnings about coming after critics, and online posts that look less like statements from a potential federal leader and more like the rhetoric of someone obsessed with enemies lists and settling scores. His reposting of a video depicting himself taking a chainsaw to political opponents wasn't satire. It was a glimpse into a worldview where force replaces restraint and intimidation replaces credibility. And when Whitehouse asked him directly whether he had reposted that imagery, Patel couldn't deny it. He couldn't say it was fake. He admitted it was him, but Whitehouse didn't stop there. He pointed out something Patel said publicly, with no pressure, no trap, no ambiguity, that FBI agents were responsible for the violence that erupted that day. He said it beyond a reasonable doubt. This wasn't speculation. These were his words. And when confronted, Patel didn't refute the quote. He only argued about context. But context couldn't compete with the cold reality that a federal investigation had already proven that claim false. Not mistaken. False. And yet Patel repeated it anyway. That alone would raise eyebrows. But the deeper cracks in Patel's credibility came from a courtroom, not a committee hearing. Whitehouse reminded the chamber that a Colorado judge, someone with no political motive, no partisan stake, had ruled that Patel's sworn testimony was not credible, illogical, and completely devoid of evidence. These weren't political insults. They were judicial findings. And in the world of law enforcement, credibility under oath is everything. If a judge says you can't be trusted on the stand, how can you be trusted with the authority to oversee agents, investigations, and evidence? Whitehouse then layered in voices most people didn't expect to hear. These weren't critics from the opposite side. These were senior officials who had worked with Patel, people who knew him up close, people who had no reason to fabricate concerns. Former Attorney General Bill Barr warned that Patel had virtually no qualifications for the job he was being considered for. A former national security advisor described Patel's ideas as ludicrous, called him untrustworthy, and said it was an absolute disgrace to put him anywhere near a role of this magnitude. Another senior intelligence figure reportedly threatened to resign rather than work under him. When former colleagues inside the same political sphere expressed that level of alarm, you don't ignore it. You ask why. And that's exactly what Whitehouse did. That he stepped back and asked the bigger question. What does it mean when someone like this is considered for leadership over the most powerful domestic law enforcement agency in the country? The FBI isn't a symbolic office. It isn't a ceremonial title. It has the authority to investigate anyone, seize evidence, execute raids, and pursue cases that can reshape the lives of ordinary citizens and major institutions alike. These powers only function in a democracy if the public believes they're being used fairly, professionally, and without political revenge. Once the public loses trust, the whole system cracks. And once it cracks, restoring it is nearly impossible. This is where Whitehouse drew on history, not as a scare tactic, but as a reminder. In countries where democratic guardrails collapsed, it didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment where someone grabbed power like flipping a switch. It happened slowly, through patterns. Security chiefs who were vengeful, leaders who treated dissent as betrayal, officials who embraced grandiose language and painted critics as enemies of the state, people who couldn't or wouldn't say no when power demanded loyalty over law. Whitehouse listed those traits and matched them, one by one, with Patel's public record. He wasn't making accusations. He was drawing comparisons. And those comparisons were enough to make even some of Patel's supporters shift in their seats. Because the danger isn't that one person suddenly controls everything. The danger is that a position built on independence turns into a weapon, that investigations become selective, that critics feel pressure, that journalists, already targeted in Patel's past quotes, begin to pull back out of fear, that whistleblowers, the people who often reveal hidden wrongdoing, stay silent because they don't trust the system to protect them. When transparency dies, corruption thrives. And that's what Whitehouse was trying to warn the country about. Not a single nomination, but a direction. He highlighted the looming risk of a chilling effect, something subtle but powerful. When a high-ranking official says publicly that he wants to go after reporters or hunt down critics, civilly or criminally, even if he claims it was rhetorical, the message is unmistakable. It teaches others in power that intimidation is acceptable. It signals to insiders that loyalty is rewarded and dissent is punished. And the people who feel it first aren't the powerful. They're the whistleblowers, the watchdog groups, the career agents who don't want to break the law for someone else's agenda. Whitehouse wasn't calling Patel a villain. He wasn't painting a conspiracy. He was asking the Senate to look at the full picture. The pardons, the rhetoric, the judge's ruling, the threats, the lack of qualifications, the former colleagues warning about him. the online posts celebrating political manhunts. Taken individually, they might seem like isolated missteps, but together, they form a pattern that's impossible to ignore. And that led to the real question of the hearing, the one that hung in the air long after Whitehouse finished speaking. What kind of FBI do we want? One that sets its own standards, operates with independence, respects the rule of law, and maintains public trust? Or one that bends its power toward political favor, loyalty tests, and retaliation? The danger isn't theoretical. It isn't abstract. It's practical. It's immediate. The FBI oversees everything from public corruption to national security threats. If that power is misused, it doesn't just inconvenience people, it destroys lives. Investigations can be launched to intimidate critics. Records can be seized or leaked. Careers can be ruined. And as Whitehouse explained, that is why the Senate's job isn't simply to approve a nominee. It's to safeguard the institution itself. He ended his warnings by calling out the facade, how Patel's calm demeanor in the hearing didn't match the public record he built over years. Anyone can appear composed in a controlled setting, but what someone does when no one is watching reveals who they truly are. And Patel's record outside the hearing room spoke loudly. The message was clear: conduct shows character. And character determines what someone will do with power. If you've been watching hearings for years, you know this wasn't normal. You know this wasn't just political theater. This was one senator telling the country that a line was being crossed, slowly but unmistakably. And once crossed, it's nearly impossible to redraw it. If this matters to you, make your voice part of the conversation. Share this video so more people understand what's at stake. Comment below on what protections you think are most critical right now: oversight, whistleblower support, independent journalism, or something else entirely. And if you want to stay informed as new developments unfold, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your voice, your awareness, and your engagement are part of what keeps institutions accountable. Let's make sure they stay that way.